Schizophrenics, what's the most dangerous hallucination you've ever had? I was 22 when I first learned to read auras. My coworker Isadora was stumbling through a presentation, and there was this pale yellow glow hovering around her head. I rubbed my eyes, figured it was eye strain or the fluorescent lights. But then I heard it. Not exactly a voice, more like a thought that wasn't mine. Yellow is fear. She's terrified. I asked Isadora if she was okay after the meeting. She broke down crying about her performance anxiety. The yellow shimmer faded as she calmed down. 2 weeks later, my boss walked in surrounded by deep purple light. I was staring at it when the not my thought came again. Purple is pain. Migraine coming. I suggested he take the day off. He laughed, but left early when the headache hit. When my girlfriend showed up with golden light around her stomach, the voice was almost gleeful. Gold means new life. She's carrying a child. The pregnancy test was positive 3 days later. At first, I thought I was developing some kind of psychic ability. The colors appeared and the voice would explain them. Blue is sorrow. Green is envy. Red is danger. I became the friend everyone came to for advice because the voice was never wrong. My sister brought her new boyfriend to dinner. Dark red energy clung to him like smoke. The voice was urgent this time. This red is violence. He will hurt her and you must warn her. I pulled her aside, begged her to leave him. She trusted me. I'd never been wrong. They broke up that night. But months later, I found out he was just a nervous guy who'd been planning to propose. But when I questioned it, the voice just whispered, red is red, is red is red. That's when the doubt crept in. I started thinking about all my other readings. Did my boss really have a migraine? Or did he leave because I suggested it and then convinced himself he felt sick? Was Isadora already showing obvious signs of anxiety that anyone could have noticed? My girlfriend had been talking about wanting kids for months. Was the golden glow real, or did I see what I expected to see? I couldn't tell what was real anymore, which auras I'd actually read and which ones I'd imagined or caused to happen. The colors got brighter after that. Walking through crowds was like swimming through neon soup. The voice narrated constantly. Green jealousy, blue depression, yellow fear, orange creativity. It wouldn't shut up. I wore sunglasses everywhere and people started avoiding me. Then the voice changed its explanations. My neighbor's pink aura developed black veins and the voice said, black is death approaching. Give it 2 weeks. She had a heart attack 14 days later. The barista's green energy grew gray spots. Gray is impact coming. Metal and glass. She had a car accident a month later. I locked myself in my apartment. Even through the door, I could see the delivery driver's colors. The voice would describe each one. Red anger at his job, blue sadness from divorce, yellow fear of poverty. I stopped answering the door. The bathroom mirror was worse. My own aura had turned completely black, with tentacles of darkness reaching outward. The voice sounded different when it explained, you are the infection. Everyone you read, you poison. Your sight spreads sickness. My mother called and I could see her aura through the phone screen, soft pink shot through with black veins. Multiple voices spoke now, overlapping. You did this. Your infection travels through connection. She's dying because you looked at her. Then my sister called. There was an emergency at work. Can you babysit? I stood in my nephew's nursery and saw pure white light radiating from his crib. The voices rose together into a chorus, no longer whispering but commanding. White is the cure. White cleanses black. You need to take his breath until his white light flows into you. Such a small sacrifice to save your mother, to save everyone you've infected. Press your hands over his mouth and the white will transfer. Take the white light. You have to take it now. I was leaning over the crib before I realized I'd moved. My hands floated above his tiny face. I could see my own black aura in my peripheral vision, those dark tentacles reaching toward the white light like hungry snakes. My hands were shaking. The voices became desperate. Now! Do it now! Your hesitation is killing your mother. Every second you wait, the infection spreads. When I covered my ears with my hands, the voices screamed instructions. Press down. Transfer the white. Cleanse the infection. Take the white. I yank my hands away from the crib so fast my knuckles crack and I'm stumbling backward before I even realize I'm moving. My shoulders slam into the nursery wall hard enough to rattle the picture frames, and I can feel the drywall give a little under the impact. The voices explode into this layered screaming that makes my skull feel like it's splitting open, all of them shouting over each other about how I'm weak and selfish, and the infection is spreading right now because I hesitated. My whole body is shaking, so bad I can barely stand. My legs feel like they might give out any second. And I can't catch my breath, but some tiny part of my brain that's still working right knows I can't trust what I'm seeing or hearing anymore. The white light around my nephew is still there, pulsing and bright, and the black tentacles from my own body are still reaching toward it. But I force my feet to move and get myself out of that room before the voices can convince me again. I grab the door frame to steady myself and pull the door mostly closed, leaving just enough of a crack that I can hear if the baby cries. And then my legs just stop working and I slide down the hallway wall until I'm sitting on the carpet. I press my palms against my eyes so hard I see these bright spots and flashes instead of colors, and the pressure helps a little, gives me something real to focus on. The voices are still going, but they've changed from screaming to this constant stream of accusations, telling me I'm weak, and my mother's pink aura with the black veins is getting worse every single second I waste sitting here. I can feel my heart beating so fast it hurts, and my hands won't stop shaking even though I'm pressing them against my face. I pull my phone out of my pocket, and it takes me 3 tries to unlock it because my fingers keep slipping on the screen. I remember reading something online once about counting breaths to calm down, so I try that. Breathing in for 4 counts and holding it, and breathing out for 4 counts. The counting gives me something to focus on besides the voices, and I keep telling myself out loud that this is symptoms. This is my brain doing something wrong. This isn't real. The voices hear me doing this and they shift their whole approach, getting quieter and more reasonable, explaining in this calm teacher voice that the white light transfer is just basic energy exchange, nothing that would hurt the baby, just a simple flow from white to black that would fix everything. It sounds so logical when they say it like that, and I have to shake my head hard to remind myself that voices telling you to hurt a baby are never logical, no matter how they sound. I scroll through my phone to my sister's number and hit call, and when she answers, I open my mouth, but nothing comes out at first. She says hello twice before I can force the words out, and even then they come out all broken up and wrong. I tell her I'm not safe to be alone with the baby, and she needs to come home right now. And she starts asking what's wrong and what happened, but I just keep repeating that I need help. Something is really wrong with me. I'm so sorry. But she has to come home right this second. I can hear the fear in her voice when she says, "Okay, she's leaving work right now. She'll be there in 15 minutes. Just stay on the phone with me." But I tell her I can't. I have to go and I hang up because I don't trust what I might say if the voices get louder again. I stay sitting in the hallway with my back pressed against the wall, and I keep the nursery door in my line of sight, but I don't let myself get any closer to it. Every couple minutes I check my phone for the time, and it feels like each minute takes about an hour to pass, and the voices keep switching back and forth between angry commands and this gentle, persuading tone. I can see these faint-colored lights bleeding out from under the nursery door, probably just the nightlight in there. But my brain keeps trying to tell me it's the white light calling to me, and I force myself to look at the blank wall across from me instead. I start counting the little bumps and swirls in the paint texture, giving myself something concrete to focus on, and I get up to 237 before I hear my sister's key in the front door. She comes rushing in and doesn't even look at me, just goes straight to the nursery, and I hear her pick up the baby and check him over. When she comes back out carrying him, I can see she's trying really hard not to cry, and she asks me what happened in this shaky voice. I tell her I've been hearing voices telling me to hurt him, that I need real professional help right now, that I think I'm having some kind of mental breakdown, and she needs to call someone who knows what to do. She nods and pulls out her own phone while backing away from me, keeping the baby on the far side of her body, and she calls 911. The operator must ask her a bunch of questions because she keeps answering yes and no, and giving our address, and she tells them her brother is having a mental health crisis, and was having thoughts about hurting her baby. Within 20 minutes, there's a knock on the door, and these 2 people in regular clothes with clipboards come in, and they introduce themselves as the mobile crisis team. They sit down and ask me questions in this really calm way, like we're just having a normal conversation, and I tell them about the command hallucinations and the visual distortions I've been calling auras for months now. They nod and write things down and explain they're going to transport me to the emergency room for a psychiatric evaluation, and the way they say it makes it sound routine and normal instead of scary. The ride in their van feels completely surreal, like I'm watching it happen to someone else, and I feel ashamed that it came to this, but also relieved because for the first time in weeks, I'm not completely alone with the voices. At the hospital ER, they take me to this small room that's just a desk and 2 chairs, and a nurse comes in with a clipboard full of forms. She asks me really detailed questions about the voices and whether I'm planning to hurt myself or anyone else, and I explain that I almost hurt my nephew, but I stopped myself and asked for help instead. She nods like this is important information and writes it all down, and then she takes me to a different room and tells me someone will be sitting with me the whole time to make sure I'm safe. There's this guy already in the room who introduces himself as my safety sitter. And he sits in a chair by the door with a book, and knowing someone is watching me actually helps the voices quiet down a little, like they're less confident with a witness around. After a few hours, a doctor comes in and sits down across from me, and he introduces himself as Dr. Nicholas Ahmad. He's got this really calm way about him, like he has all the time in the world, and nothing I could say would shock him, and something about that makes it easier to talk. He asks me to describe the voices and the visual experiences from the very beginning, so I walk him through the whole thing, starting with the yellow glow around Isadora at work, and ending with the black tentacles and the white light in the nursery. When I finish, he tells me that command hallucinations are a recognized symptom of several treatable conditions, and the fact that I resisted the commands and sought help is a really positive sign. Hearing him call it symptoms instead of some kind of moral failure or proof I'm a terrible person makes me feel like maybe I'm not completely broken. He explains they want to start me on an antipsychotic medication right away and keep me overnight for observation. And depending on how I respond, they might recommend a short voluntary admission to the psychiatric unit. I'm so exhausted and scared that I just nod and agree to whatever he thinks is necessary, and within an hour, a nurse brings me pills in a little cup, and I swallow them with water. They move me to a quieter room with a bed and doctor. Ahmad mentions that if I refuse voluntary treatment, they might need to pursue an involuntary hold, but he'd rather I choose to accept help. I tell him I'm choosing it because I know I'm not safe on my own yet, and he nods and makes a note in my chart before leaving me alone with a different safety sitter who settles into a chair with her phone. The medication makes everything feel heavy and slow, like I'm moving underwater. A nurse comes in every 15 minutes to check on me, shining a light in my eyes, and asking if I'm okay, and each time I nod because I don't have the energy to explain that okay feels like a word from another language right now. The voices are still there, but they sound different, like they're calling from down a long hallway instead of right inside my head, and when they try to tell me about colors or infections, their words get fuzzy and hard to follow. I sleep in short bursts between the nurse checks, dropping off for maybe 20 minutes before someone wakes me up again, and each time I wake up, the room looks a little more normal. The colored lights I've been seeing everywhere for weeks are still there when I look at the walls or the safety sitter, but they're dimmer now, more like those spots you see after looking at something bright instead of solid glowing halos. Around 3 in the morning I wake up, and the voices are just whispers, and I can actually think my own thoughts without them jumping in to narrate everything. Dr. Ahmad comes back in the morning looking fresh and rested, while I feel like I've been run over by a truck. He pulls up a chair and explains that they'd like me to agree to a voluntary admission to the psychiatric unit for a few days of intensive treatment and watching. He's really honest about it, telling me that if I'm still having command hallucinations about hurting people, they might need to do an involuntary hold, but he thinks I'll do better if I choose to accept help and participate actively in my treatment. I sign the voluntary admission papers because I get the reality of my situation now, and because some part of me is actually relieved to have other people making decisions while I can't trust my own brain. They move me to a different floor where everything is quieter, and there are more locked doors, and a nurse shows me to a small room with a bed and a desk and a window with bars on it. Once I'm settled in the psychiatric unit, they tell me I can make phone calls from the common area phone, and I force myself to call my sister first because I owe her an apology. When she answers, I can barely get the words out, but I manage to tell her I'm sorry for scaring her and putting her son at risk. She's trying to be supportive, but I can hear the fear and the not knowing what to say in her voice when she tells me she's just glad I got help before anything happened. I promise her I won't ask to see the baby again until doctors say it's safe, and she sounds relieved when she agrees that's the right plan for now. We hang up and I feel like I might throw up from shame. An hour later, my sister calls back and I can tell from her voice that something else is wrong. She explains that because I told them about the command hallucinations about hurting a child, the hospital is required to report it to Child Protective Services. I feel a wave of shame and panic crash over me, but she quickly adds that the social worker told her this is standard procedure and that my choice to get help will actually work in everyone's favor. I agree to cooperate fully with whatever CPS needs to do, understanding that I've put my nephew at risk, even though I didn't actually hurt him. After we hang up, I sit in the common area staring at nothing for a while. I force myself to call my workplace next and speak to my manager, explaining in really vague terms that I'm in the hospital dealing with a mental health crisis and won't be in for at least a week. She sounds concerned and tells me to focus on getting better, and she mentions that HR will probably reach out about medical leave paperwork. When I hang up, I feel this weird mix of relief that I still have a job and worry about what my coworkers will think when they find out where I am. That evening, Dr. Ahmad sits with me for a longer session and provides what he calls psychoeducation about command hallucinations and psychotic symptoms. He explains that commands to harm others are actually a known symptom that many people experience without ever acting on them, and that the brain can make up really convincing false things during certain types of mental illness. Hearing him describe my experiences as medical symptoms that can be treated instead of moral failures or proof I'm a terrible person gives me the first real bit of hope I've felt in days. He uses simple words and draws diagrams showing how the brain can misfire and create perceptions that feel completely real but aren't based on anything external. The next morning, I attend my first group therapy session, feeling awkward and exposed as I sit in a circle with 7 other patients. When it's my turn to share, I mention the command voices and 2 other people nod like they know exactly what I'm talking about. One woman describes her own experience with voices telling her to hurt her sister and how she's learned to recognize them as symptoms and use coping skills instead of listening. Hearing that someone else went through this and didn't act on it makes me feel less like a monster and more like someone with an illness that can be managed. During an individual session with Dr. Ahmad later, we start mapping out patterns in when my symptoms got worse, and I realized that the visual distortions always seemed to spike when I was under fluorescent lights or hadn't slept well. He writes this down in his notes and explains that environmental triggers and not sleeping can definitely make psychotic symptoms worse. We create a list of my specific triggers so far, including bright lights, stress, and being alone for too long, and he suggests we'll work on managing these factors as part of my treatment plan. An occupational therapist visits in the afternoon and introduces himself as Jonas. He teaches me practical grounding techniques that are more concrete than anything I've tried before. He has me practice holding ice cubes until my hands hurt from the cold, doing paced breathing with a visual timer, and using a technique called 5-4-3-2-1, where I name things I can see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. These feel almost too simple to work, but when I practice them during a moment when I see faint colored lights around another patient, the lights actually fade faster than usual. That afternoon, a CPS investigator comes to the hospital to interview me as part of their assessment. She introduces herself as Inez Flores, and she's professional but not mean, as she asks detailed questions about what happened in the nursery, my relationship with my sister and nephew, and what steps I'm taking now. I'm completely honest about the command hallucinations and my decision to ask for help, and she makes notes while explaining that she'll also need to interview my sister and check out the home environment before making any recommendations. When she leaves, I feel drained, but also like maybe I did the right thing by being truthful about everything. Back in my room that evening, I start writing in a notebook the hospital provided, creating a timeline of all the times I thought I was reading auras correctly. I list Isadora's anxiety at the top of the first page, then my boss's migraine, then my girlfriend's pregnancy, trying to examine each incident objectively to figure out if I actually predicted anything, or just noticed obvious signs and convinced myself I had special abilities. For Isadora, I write down that she was already stumbling through her presentation before I saw any yellow glow, and that her body language was showing clear nervousness that anyone could have picked up on. For my boss, I note that he did leave early, but only after I suggested he looked unwell, which might have planted the idea in his head. For my girlfriend, I admit that she'd been talking about wanting kids for months before I saw the golden light, so maybe I just saw what I expected to see. The exercise is uncomfortable because it means admitting I might have caused harm based on completely false perceptions, but I remember what Dr. Ahmad said about examining these beliefs being important for my recovery. I fill 3 pages with incidents, questioning each one, trying to separate what actually happened from what the voices told me was happening. By the time I finish, my hand is cramping and I feel exhausted but also strangely lighter, like writing it all down helped me see how much of it was just my brain making connections that weren't really there. The new medication is helping with the voices and visual distortions, but it's also making me incredibly restless and unable to sit still for more than a few minutes. I try to read a magazine from the common area, but I can't focus on the words because my legs feel like they need to move constantly. I pace around my small room, then walk the hallway, then come back and try sitting on my bed. But within seconds, I'm up again, feeling like I want to crawl out of my own skin. When the night nurse comes by for evening checks, I mention the restlessness, and she asks me specific questions about when it started and how severe it feels. She notes everything in my chart and says she'll make sure Dr. Ahmad knows in the morning so he can adjust my medication if needed. I spend half the night pacing my room, walking from the door to the window and back again, counting my steps to try to distract myself from the uncomfortable buzzing energy in my muscles. The hallway lights are dimmed for nighttime, and I can hear other patients sleeping or talking quietly in their rooms, and I feel guilty that I'm the only one still moving around making noise. Around 3 in the morning, I finally wear myself out enough to lie down, but even then my legs keep twitching, and I only sleep in short bursts between the constant need to move. This physical discomfort is almost worse than the hallucinations in a different way, because at least with the voices I could try to ignore them or use grounding techniques, but this restlessness is in my actual body and there's no way to make it stop. My mother calls the next morning and I can hear that she's been crying as she tells me she loves me and asks what she can do to help. Her voice sounds shaky, and I feel a wave of guilt knowing I've put her through this fear and stress. I try to reassure her that I'm getting good treatment and that the doctors think my prognosis is positive, carefully avoiding any mention of the auras or my previous belief that she was dying from my infection. She asks a lot of questions about what the hospital is like and when I might be coming home, and I answer as honestly as I can while keeping the scary details vague. She wants to visit, but I ask her to wait a few more days until I'm feeling more stable, explaining that I'm still adjusting to the medication and dealing with some side effects. She sounds disappointed but agrees, then makes me promise to call her every day so she knows I'm okay. I promise, and we talk for a few more minutes about normal things like what she's been cooking and how the neighbors are doing, and having a regular conversation about everyday stuff actually helps me feel more grounded and less like I'm completely broken. After we hang up, I sit on my bed feeling emotionally drained, but also grateful that my mother is being so supportive despite everything I've put the family through. Dr. Ahmad comes by later that morning and introduces me to a cognitive technique he calls reality testing, where I write down my predictions or perceptions and then track what actually happens versus what I believed would happen. He sits down with me at the small table in my room and pulls out a worksheet with columns labeled across the top. The first column says perceived aura, The second says what I thought it meant. The third says what I predicted would occur. And the fourth says what actually occurred. He explains that the goal is to help me see the pattern of my brain, generating false connections and convincing explanations for random or misinterpreted events. He walks me through an example using a hypothetical situation, showing me how I would fill in each column and then compare my prediction to reality. The worksheet feels almost too simple, like something you'd give a kid in the school, but I understand the logic behind it, and I can see how it might help me catch myself when I start believing the false perceptions again. Dr. Ahmad leaves me with a stack of blank worksheets and tells me to use them whenever I notice myself making predictions or seeing patterns, and to bring the completed ones to our next session so we can review them together. I spend the afternoon working on the reality testing worksheet, starting with the incidents I remember most clearly. For the neighbor with the pink aura and black veins, I write down that I predicted death in 2 weeks, and she had a heart attack 14 days later. But then in the what actually occurred column, I add that I never actually spoke to her or knew anything about her health history, so I have no idea if she had known heart problems or warning signs I wasn't aware of. Maybe she'd been having chest pains for weeks and was already at high risk. Or maybe she'd just had her annual checkup and gotten bad news from her doctor. I realize that the timing matching up doesn't prove I predicted anything. It just proves that heart attacks happen, and sometimes the timing is a coincidence. For the barista's car accident, I note that I predicted it a month in advance but never tried to warn her or prevent it, which seems significant now that I'm examining my own behavior honestly. If I really believed she was in danger, why didn't I say something to her? Why did I just watch and wait for it to happen, so I could feel validated when it did? Writing this down makes me feel sick to my stomach, because it shows me how much I was using other people's misfortunes to feed my delusion instead of actually caring about their safety. I fill out 3 more worksheets for other incidents, and each one shows me how I was either noticing obvious things everyone else could see or making predictions, so vague they could apply to almost anything, or taking credit for coincidences that had nothing to do with me. Inez comes back that afternoon to interview me again, this time with more specific questions about my support system and what safety measures I think would be necessary before I could be around my nephew again. She sits across from me in one of the private meeting rooms and has her notebook open, writing down everything I say. I tell her honestly that I think I need to prove medication compliance by taking my pills every day and having my blood levels checked regularly to make sure the drugs are working. I explain that I should attend outpatient therapy at least weekly, maybe more often at first, and keep all my psychiatry appointments without missing any. I mention that I probably need to have another adult present for any contact with the baby for the foreseeable future, maybe even for months or longer. Because I don't trust myself alone with him yet, and I don't think my family should have to trust me either, until I've proven I'm stable. Inez seems to appreciate my insight into my own limitations, and writes down my suggestions as part of her assessment notes. She asks about my relationship with my sister, and whether I think our family can handle the stress of this situation, and I explain that we've always been close, but I understand that I've damaged that trust and it's going to take time to rebuild. She nods and makes more notes, then asks about my work situation and whether I have health insurance and a stable living situation, and I answer all her questions as completely as I can. Later that day, Inez interviews my sister at her home, and my sister texts me afterward to say it went okay, and that she explained our family dynamics and her concerns about safety. The text is longer than usual, and I can tell my sister is trying to be supportive while also being honest about her fears. She mentions that she told Inez about my history of being reliable and caring before this crisis, which she hopes will help with the assessment, but also that she was honest about needing clear boundaries and professional guidance before allowing me around her son again. She writes that Inez asked good questions and seemed fair, and that she felt heard during the interview. I text back thanking her for being honest and telling her I completely understand and support whatever boundaries she needs to set. I add that I'm grateful she's willing to consider any contact at all after what happened, and that I'll do whatever it takes to prove I'm safe and stable. She responds with a heart emoji and tells me to focus on getting better, and I feel a small bit of hope that maybe our relationship isn't completely destroyed. My HR manager, Pilar Stewart, emails me through the hospital's patient portal, asking for medical documentation and information about my expected timeline for return to work. The email is professional and carefully worded, mentioning that the company offers short-term disability and FMLA leave for medical situations. She suggests we set up a call once I'm discharged to discuss accommodations and transition plans. The email doesn't ask for details about my diagnosis, which I appreciate, though I'm anxious about whether I'll still have a job once they understand the severity of what I'm dealing with. I know that mental illness is supposed to be protected under disability laws, but I also know that plenty of people lose their jobs anyway when they have psychiatric hospitalizations. I write back a brief response saying I'll have documentation ready and I'll reach out once I have a discharge date, keeping it vague and professional. After I send the email, I sit staring at my phone feeling worried about money and rent and what happens if I can't work for a while. Dr. Ahmad comes by that evening and tells me he wants to adjust my medication to address the restlessness side effect. He explains that what I'm experiencing is called akathisia, and it's a known side effect of the antipsychotic I'm on. He adds a different drug that should help with the restlessness and slightly lowers the dose of the antipsychotic, explaining that we're trying to find the right balance where my symptoms are controlled, but the side effects are manageable. That night, I actually sleep for 6 solid hours, which is the longest stretch I've had in weeks. When I wake up the next morning, I notice immediately that the constant buzzing energy in my muscles is mostly gone, and I can sit still without feeling like I need to jump out of my skin. The voices are noticeably quieter, too, more like distant whispers than clear commands, and I have to strain to hear what they're saying. The colored lights I've been seeing around people are also less intense, though they haven't disappeared completely yet. When the morning nurse comes in to take my vitals, I can see a faint pinkish glow around her, but it's much dimmer than before, and I can easily ignore it. I feel cautiously hopeful that the medication adjustments are working, and that maybe I'm actually going to be able to function normally again. I try calling my girlfriend to explain what's been happening, but the conversation is awkward and painful from the very first moment. She answers, but her voice sounds distant and careful, like she's talking to a stranger instead of someone she's been dating for 2 years. I try to explain about the hospitalization and the diagnosis and the medication, but I can hear her getting quieter and more withdrawn as I talk. When I finally stop talking, there's a long silence before she admits she needs some space to process everything. She says she cares about me, but she's scared and doesn't know how to support someone going through this. She mentions that her aunt had schizophrenia, and it was really hard on the whole family, and she's not sure she can handle being in a relationship with someone who has this kind of mental illness. I feel my chest tighten as she talks, knowing where this conversation is heading but hoping I'm wrong. She says she needs time to figure out if she can handle this, if she's strong enough to be with someone who might have episodes or need hospitalization again. We agree to take a break while I focus on treatment, and I can hear that she's crying a little when we say goodbye. After we hang up, I sit on my bed feeling crushingly alone, despite being surrounded by hospital staff and other patients in nearby rooms. I understand why she needs space, and I don't blame her for being scared, but it still hurts knowing that my illness has cost me this relationship on top of everything else it's taken from me. The next morning, I have my individual therapy session scheduled with Dr. Ahmad, and I walk down the hallway to his office feeling nervous about what we're going to talk about. He sits across from me with my chart open and asks me to walk him through those early moments when I thought I was reading auras correctly, starting with Isadora and the yellow glow during her presentation. I describe how I saw the pale yellow light and heard the voice say she was terrified, and how when I asked her about it afterward, she broke down crying about her anxiety. Dr. Ahmad nods and asks me to think about what I actually observed before I saw the yellow glow. And I realize now that Isadora had been stumbling over her words, her hands were shaking, and she kept looking down at her notes instead of at the audience. He points out that I might have picked up on obvious body language signals that anyone could have noticed, and when I told her I sensed she was scared, I basically gave her permission to confirm what I'd guessed based on normal observation. The yellow glow and the voice came after I'd already noticed her anxiety, not before, which means I was interpreting coincidence as prediction. We go through my boss and the purple migraine light next, and Dr. Ahmad asks if my boss had shown any signs of not feeling well that morning. I remember now that he'd been rubbing his temples during the meeting and had mentioned the bright fluorescent lights bothering him, which are pretty clear signs someone might be getting a headache. When I suggested he take the day off, I might have planted the idea in his head, and then when he did develop a headache later, he remembered my suggestion, and it seemed like I'd predicted it. Dr. Ahmad calls this a self-fulfilling prophecy, where my suggestion actually created the outcome I thought I was predicting. The conversation makes me feel stupid for believing in the auras for so long, but also relieved because it means I wasn't actually psychic and then lost some special ability. I was just misreading normal human behavior and convincing myself I had powers that never existed in the first place. After the therapy session, I go back to my room and pull out the notebook the hospital gave me, deciding to start tracking my symptoms more carefully like Dr. Ahmad suggested. I write down every time I notice visual distortions or hear whispers, and I also note what I was doing right before it happened. Over the next few days, I start seeing a clear pattern that I hadn't noticed before. The colored lights and voices get worse about an hour after I drink coffee from the hospital cafeteria, and they also spike when I skip meals or go too long without eating. I show Dr. Ahmad my tracking notes during our next session, and he confirms that caffeine is a stimulant that can make psychiatric symptoms worse, and that blood sugar crashes from skipping meals can also trigger hallucinations and paranoia. We add basic self-care rules to my treatment plan, including eating 3 regular meals a day, limiting myself to 1 small coffee in the morning, and keeping snacks in my room for between meals. These feel like such simple, practical things that I'm almost embarrassed I didn't figure them out myself, but Dr. Ahmad says most people don't realize how much basic physical health affects mental symptoms. Having concrete things I can control makes me feel less powerless, like I'm not just waiting for medication to fix me, but actually participating in my own recovery. A few days later, Dr. Ahmad brings a printed form to our session and explains that he wants me to sign a formal safety contract. The document says I agree not to harm myself or others, and that I'll ask for help immediately if I have thoughts or commands about violence. I read through it carefully and see that it lists specific phone numbers I'm supposed to call if I'm in crisis, including the mobile crisis line, Dr. Ahmad's office emergency number, and 911 if I'm in immediate danger. He explains that this is partly a legal protection for the hospital, making sure there's documentation that I understand my responsibilities. But he also says that writing down my commitment can make it feel more real and binding for me personally. I sign the contract understanding that it's not just a piece of paper, but an actual promise I'm making to myself and to the people who care about me. Putting my signature on the line makes the whole thing feel more serious and permanent, like I'm officially choosing to fight against the voices instead of listening to them. Dr. Ahmad keeps the original in my chart and gives me a copy to keep in my room, and I fold it up and put it in my notebook so I can look at it if I'm struggling. Later that afternoon, I'm sitting in the common area watching TV with a few other patients, trying to relax after all the intense therapy sessions. A commercial comes on with bright flashing colors, advertising some kind of cleaning product, and suddenly I see faint colored glows appearing around the other patients sitting near me. My heart starts pounding, and I feel panic rising in my chest because I thought the visual distortions were getting better, not coming back. But then I remember the grounding technique Jonas taught me, and instead of focusing on the colors or trying to figure out what they mean, I press my feet firmly against the floor and start naming 5 things I can see in the room. I see the TV screen, the coffee table, a plant in the corner, the clock on the wall, and the exit sign above the door. By the time I finish naming all 5 things, the colored glows have faded back to normal, and I can see the other patients clearly without any distortions. The whole episode only lasted a minute or two, and I managed it myself without needing to call a nurse or leave the room. I feel a small burst of pride that I actually used the coping skill and it worked, proving that I can handle symptoms when they pop up instead of just panicking and letting them spiral out of control. That evening, I asked Dr. Ahmad if we could set up a family meeting with my sister and mother before I get discharged, because I want to apologize to them properly and hear their concerns directly instead of just over the phone. He thinks about it for a minute, and then agrees that it could be helpful for everyone, saying he'll facilitate the meeting to make sure it stays productive and doesn't turn into anyone attacking anyone else. Knowing this conversation is coming fills me with fear, because I have to face the people I scared the most. And admit what I almost did, but I also know I need to do this if I want any chance of rebuilding trust with my family. Dr. Ahmad schedules the meeting for a few days out to give everyone time to prepare, and he says he'll call my sister and mother to explain the format and make sure they're comfortable participating. I spend the next couple days feeling nervous about what they're going to say, and whether my sister will ever be able to forgive me for putting her son at risk. A couple days later, my phone buzzes with a text from my sister saying that Inez came by her house that afternoon to do a home visit and safety check. She writes that Inez looked at the locks on all the doors, checked out the baby monitor system they have set up, and reviewed the list of trusted adults who could provide supervision if my sister ever needed emergency childcare and I wasn't an option. My sister says Inez seemed satisfied with everything and mentioned that as long as I keep going to treatment and following the safety plan, she'll probably recommend closing the CPS case after the monitoring period is done. My sister sounds cautiously hopeful in her text, saying she thinks we might actually get through this without permanent damage to our family relationships. Reading her words makes me feel a tiny bit of hope that I haven't completely destroyed everything, even though I know it's going to take a long time to rebuild the trust I broke. That evening, my mother calls, and I can hear in her voice that she's trying to sound casual, as she mentions she has a cardiology appointment scheduled for next week. My stomach drops, and I feel a jolt of fear remembering the voices claiming I saw black veins in her pink aura, telling me she was dying because of my infection. But instead of letting myself spiral into panic, I force myself to ask practical questions about her symptoms and when they started. She explains that she's been having occasional heart palpitations for a few years now, and her regular doctor just wants to run some routine tests to make sure everything is okay. She sounds calm and matter-of-fact about it, not scared or worried, and she mentions that her doctor thinks it's probably just age-related stuff that can be managed with medication if needed. I practice the reality testing skill Dr. Ahmad taught me, recognizing that her appointment is normal preventive care that has nothing to do with any imaginary infection I thought I was spreading. The rational explanation helps quiet the whisper of doubt trying to start up in the back of my mind, and I'm able to have a normal conversation with her about her health without freaking out. In my next therapy session with Dr. Ahmad, he asks me to talk about the specific moment in the nursery when I almost acted on the command hallucinations, and just thinking about it makes my hands start shaking. I describe standing over my nephew's crib, seeing the pure white light radiating from him, and hearing all the voices rise together insisting that taking his breath was the only way to cure the infection and save my mother. I explain how my hands were hovering above his face, and I was so close to pressing down, believing completely that it was the right thing to do because the voices sounded so convinced and logical. Dr. Ahmad asks me what made me stop, and I have to think hard about that moment because it happened so fast. I tell him that some tiny part of me recognized that what the voices were saying was wrong, even though they sounded so sure, and that part of me was strong enough to make me pull back and call for help instead. We spend time reframing the white light as my brain generating a scary, intrusive image during extreme stress, not as something real that I was actually seeing. Dr. Ahmad emphasizes over and over that my decision to pull back and ask for help was the critical turning point that kept anyone from getting hurt. And that even in the middle of a serious psychiatric crisis, I was able to access some part of my judgment that knew not to act on the commands. Talking through it is one of the hardest things I've done. But by the end of the session, I feel like I understand better what happened and why, even if I still feel ashamed and scared about how close I came. That night, I take my medication at the regular time and get into bed, and for the second night in a row, I sleep for 6 solid hours without waking up once. When I open my eyes in the morning, the usual anxiety and confusion I've been feeling for weeks is noticeably quieter, like someone turned down the volume in my head. The voices are still there, but they're reduced to occasional whispers that I can easily identify as symptoms rather than real information I need to pay attention to. When the morning nurse comes in to take my vitals, I notice a very faint pinkish glow around her, but it's so dim I can barely see it. Nothing like the bright neon colors that used to overwhelm me constantly. I'm starting to feel like maybe my brain actually can function normally again with the right medication and support, and that I might be able to have a regular life instead of being trapped in hallucinations forever. The family meeting happens 2 days later in a private room on the unit, with Dr. Ahmad sitting off to the side, ready to step in if things get too heated. My sister and mother arrive together, and we all sit down in a circle of chairs, and I can see my sister has been crying even before we start. Dr. Ahmad explains that this is a chance for everyone to share their feelings honestly and work on rebuilding trust, and then he looks at me to begin. I apologize to both of them for scaring them and putting my nephew at risk, and I try to explain what was happening in my head without making excuses for my behavior. My sister starts crying harder and tells me she's angry and hurt that I didn't tell her sooner that something was wrong, but she's also grateful that I asked for help when I did, instead of actually hurting her baby. We talk honestly about what boundaries need to exist going forward, and my sister is clear that she can't have me around her son unsupervised until doctors confirm I'm stable and not a risk. My mother sits quietly crying and holding my hand, telling me she loves me, but she's also scared of what might have happened. By the end of the meeting, my sister says that once I'm stable and following my outpatient treatment plan consistently, we can try brief supervised visits where another adult is always present and eventually work up to more contact if everything goes well. Hearing her say she's willing to rebuild trust eventually makes me break down crying with relief, because I was so afraid she'd never let me be part of my nephew's life again. Dr. Ahmad wraps up the meeting by summarizing the agreements we made and reminding everyone that recovery takes time and patience, but that we're all moving in the right direction by having this honest conversation. That day, Dr. Ahmad asks me to meet him in one of the small consultation rooms down the hall from the unit, and when I sit down across from him, he has my chart open and a serious but kind expression on his face. He tells me I've made really good progress over the past week and that he thinks I'm getting close to being ready for discharge, which makes my stomach flip with both excitement and fear at the same time. He explains the criteria I need to meet before I can leave, ticking them off on his fingers as he talks. First, I need to show consistent response to the medication with minimal breakthrough symptoms. Second, I need to show I can use the coping skills they've taught me when symptoms do come up. Third, I need a solid safety plan with people to call and steps to follow if things get bad. Fourth, I need to have outpatient appointments already scheduled so there's no gap in treatment. He looks at me carefully and says, if I keep improving like I have been, he estimates I could be ready to go home in another 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 at most. The timeline feels both too fast and too slow because part of me is desperate to get out of here and sleep in my own bed and have some privacy, but another part of me is scared about leaving this safe bubble where nurses check on me and doctors are always available and I don't have to make any real decisions. I tell him I understand the criteria and I'll keep working on everything, and he nods and makes some notes in my chart before standing up to leave. Back in my room that evening after dinner, I pull out the notebook the hospital gave me and start working on what Dr. Ahmad called a crisis plan. I write warning signs at the top of the first page and start listing everything I can think of that might mean my symptoms are getting worse. The voices getting louder or more frequent, seeing bright colors around people again, feeling like I need to avoid mirrors or certain lights, not being able to sleep for more than a few hours, feeling like I'm spreading infection or hurting people by being near them. I fill up almost a whole page with warning signs, trying to be as specific as possible so I'll actually notice if things start going downhill. On the next page, I write coping skills to try and list all the techniques Jonas and the other staff have taught me. The 5-4-3-2-1 grounding method where I name things I can see and touch and hear. Running cold water over my hands or holding ice cubes. Paced breathing with counting. Calling the voices what they are, just symptoms, not real information. Taking my medication at the exact same time every day. Getting outside in natural light. avoiding fluorescent lights and too much caffeine. The list gets pretty long, and I feel a little proud that I've actually learned all these concrete things to do instead of just hoping the symptoms go away on their own. Then I start a new page with people to call for help and create a hierarchy like doctor, Ahmad suggested. Number 1 is my outpatient therapist once I have one assigned. Number 2 is doctor, Ahmad's office number during business hours. Number 3 is the mobile crisis line that's available 24/7. Number 4 is 911 if I'm in immediate danger of hurting myself or someone else. I write all the phone numbers down carefully, and then I add my sister's number with a note that says, only if I need someone to talk to, not if I'm having active symptoms about hurting people. Having it all written down in order makes me feel more prepared, like I'm creating a roadmap I can follow when my brain isn't working right and I can't think clearly about what to do next. The next morning in group therapy, there are 8 of us sitting in the circle of chairs in the common room, and when it's time for sharing, a guy named Noah, who I've seen around but haven't talked to much, raises his hand. He's probably in his 30s with a beard and tired eyes, and when the therapist running group calls on him, he takes a deep breath and starts talking about his relapse. He explains that he was doing really well for 6 months, taking his medication, going to therapy, managing his symptoms, feeling almost normal. Then he decided he was cured and didn't need the medication anymore, so he stopped taking it without telling his doctor. Within 3 weeks, he was hearing voices again and having paranoid thoughts, and within 2 months, he was back in the hospital going through the whole process of finding the right medication combination all over again. His voice is matter of fact, but I can hear the frustration and regret underneath, and several other people in the circle are nodding like they know exactly what he's talking about. Another woman shares that she's relapsed twice, and each time it was because she stopped medication or stopped going to therapy when she felt better. A younger guy mentions that he's learned his symptoms never fully go away, he just gets better at managing them and recognizing them early. The therapist guides the conversation, and the collective wisdom that comes out is pretty sobering. Recovery isn't about getting cured or reaching some finish line where you're done dealing with mental illness. It's about learning to manage symptoms over time, recognizing warning signs early, and having a solid support system and treatment plan you stick to even when you feel good. Nobody in the circle is promising that discharge means everything will be fine forever, and honestly, that's more helpful than false hope would be. When group ends, I feel like I understand better what I'm actually facing, which is a lifetime of managing this illness, not a few weeks of treatment, and then back to normal. That afternoon, I'm in my room reading when one of the nurses comes to tell me I have a phone call, and when I pick up the phone at the nurse's station, it's Inez from CPS. Her voice is professional but not cold, as she explains she's finished her investigation and wants to outline the next steps. She says that based on her interviews with me, my sister, my mother and Dr. Ahmad, plus her home visit to my sister's place, she's recommending that the case be monitored for 90 days and then closed if I maintain treatment compliance and there are no further incidents. She emphasizes that this is actually a positive outcome given the circumstances, because in cases involving command hallucinations about harming a child, CPS could have pursued more restrictive measures. She tells me that my choice to ask for help before acting on the hallucinations, plus my cooperation with the investigation and treatment, have been really important factors in her assessment. The monitoring period means I'll need to keep going to all my appointments, take my medication as prescribed, and follow the safety plan about not being alone with my nephew. She'll do one more home visit in 30 days to check on how things are going, and if everything looks good at the 90-day mark, she'll recommend the case be closed completely. I thank her for being fair and thorough with the investigation, and I tell her I'm committed to following every single requirement she's outlined, because I understand how serious this is. After we hang up, I feel a weight lift off my shoulders, because 90 days of monitoring is way better than losing contact with my family forever, or having the case stay open indefinitely. I check my email on the hospital computer later that day, and there's a message from Pilar in HR with several attachments. The email explains that she's sending me the FMLA paperwork I need to fill out for medical leave, along with information about the company's short-term disability benefits. She writes that if I'm approved for disability, it would cover 60% of my salary while I'm out on medical leave, which would help with rent and bills and medication costs. The financial relief of knowing I'll have some income is huge, because I've been lying awake at night worrying about how I'm going to pay for everything if I can't work. Pilar's email also suggests we schedule a phone call for after I'm discharged to talk about a gradual return to work plan and discuss any accommodations I might need when I come back. Her tone throughout the email is professional but supportive, not judgmental or worried, and reading it makes me feel like maybe I won't lose my job over this after all. I write back thanking her for the information and saying I'll fill out the paperwork as soon as possible and that I'd appreciate the chance to talk about accommodations once I'm out of the hospital. 2 days later, Dr. Ahmad tells me he wants to do a practice run to see how I handle being outside the structured hospital environment, and he arranges for me to spend an hour in the hospital's outdoor garden area with minimal supervision. A staff member walks me down to the garden entrance and tells me she'll be nearby if I need anything, but otherwise I'm on my own to practice managing in a less controlled space. I walk out into the sunshine, and it feels almost overwhelming after being inside under artificial lights for over a week. There are benches and flower beds and a small fountain, and I pick a bench in a sunny spot and sit down. Within a few minutes, I start noticing faint colored glows around some of the plants, like pale green around the leaves and soft yellow around some flowers. My first instinct is to panic and assume the hallucinations are getting worse, but I make myself stop and use the reality testing skills. I say quietly to myself that these are visual distortions, just my brain creating false perceptions, not real auras with meaning. I focus on the physical sensations instead, pressing my feet flat against the ground and feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the hardness of the bench under me. I practice the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, naming 5 things I can see: bench, fountain, flowers, tree, path. 4 things I can touch: bench, my jeans, my shirt, my phone in my pocket. 3 things I can hear: fountain water, birds, distant traffic. 2 things I can smell: flowers, fresh air. 1 thing I can taste: the mint from the gum I'm chewing. By the time I finish the exercise, the colored glows have faded to almost nothing, and I feel calmer and more grounded. I spend the rest of the hour just sitting and breathing and practicing, staying present, and when I go back inside and report to Dr. Ahmad that I managed the symptoms successfully without staff intervention, he makes a note in my chart and says, "This is good evidence that I'm ready for discharge soon." That evening, I'm lying on my bed scrolling through my phone when I come across the Notes app, where I've been keeping detailed records about people's auras for months. There are pages and pages of entries with names and dates and descriptions of colors and what I thought they meant and predictions I made. I start reading through them and I feel sick, because now I can see how delusional it all was, how I was creating patterns and meanings out of random visual distortions and confirmation bias. I think about Dr. Ahmad's explanation of how my brain was generating false perceptions and convincing explanations, and I understand that keeping these notes would just make it easier to fall back into that delusional thinking if my symptoms get worse again. I select all the notes and hover my finger over the delete button, and for a second I hesitate because it feels like I'm erasing part of my identity, this thing I thought made me special and useful to people. But then I remember standing over my nephew's crib with my hands reaching toward his face, and I press delete and watch all the entries disappear. I go through my phone more carefully after that, deleting photos where I thought I'd captured auras, removing voice memos where I'd recorded my predictions, clearing out everything related to what I'd believed were my abilities. It feels strange and sad, like I'm letting go of something I thought was real and important. But I also feel a sense of relief, like I'm closing the door on a dangerous delusion and choosing reality instead. The mix of loss and relief sits heavy in my chest as I put my phone away and try to sleep. Late that night, I wake up suddenly, and the overhead light in my room looks wrong somehow, like it has dark shapes extending from it toward my bed. I blink hard and rub my eyes, but the shapes are still there, black tentacles reaching across the ceiling toward me, and I hear a faint whisper saying something about infection spreading. My heart starts pounding, and I feel the familiar pull of panic, the urge to believe what I'm seeing is real and meaningful. But instead of lying there and letting it spiral, I force myself to get out of bed and walk to the bathroom. I turn on the cold water in the sink and stick my hands under the stream, and the shock of the cold against my skin jolts me back into my body. I keep my hands under the water for a full minute, focusing on the temperature and the sensation and the sound of the water running. I look at my face in the mirror and say out loud that this is just a symptom flare, a brief hallucination, not reality. The black tentacles are just my brain creating false images, and the whisper is just an intrusive thought, not a real message about spreading infection. I dry my hands and go back to my room, and the tentacles are already fading, becoming less solid and defined. Within a few more minutes, they're completely gone, and the light looks normal again. I get back into bed feeling proud that I managed the symptom myself, using the techniques Jonas taught me, and I'm able to fall back asleep, knowing I handled it without needing to call for staff help. The next morning, Dr. Ahmad comes to my room with a packet of papers and tells me we're going to work on completing my WRAP together, which stands for Wellness Recovery Action Plan. He explains it's basically a detailed guide I'm creating for myself about how to stay stable, what to watch out for, and what to do if things start going wrong. We start with a section called Daily Maintenance, and I list out all the things I need to do every single day to keep myself healthy. Take my medication at the same time each morning. Eat 3 regular meals instead of skipping or forgetting. Get at least 7 hours of sleep each night. Avoid fluorescent lights when possible, and use softer lighting at home. Limit caffeine to 1 cup of coffee in the morning. Spend some time outside in natural light. Check in with myself about symptoms and use grounding techniques if needed. The list feels long, but Dr. Ahmad says these basic maintenance activities are the foundation of staying stable. Then we work on a section for early warning signs, which is similar to what I wrote in my crisis plan but more detailed. We list specific things that would indicate my symptoms are starting to get worse, like voices becoming more frequent or commanding, seeing bright auras around people again, having trouble sleeping for multiple nights in a row, feeling paranoid about spreading infection, wanting to isolate completely. For each warning sign, we write down specific actions to take, like calling my therapist for an extra session or contacting Dr. Ahmad's office to discuss medication adjustment. We create sections for crisis planning with the hierarchy of people to call and post-crisis recovery with steps for getting back on track after a setback. By the time we finish, I have a comprehensive reference guide that covers pretty much every scenario I might face in managing my mental health going forward. Later that afternoon, Inez calls again, and this time she asks to speak to me, my sister, and Dr. Ahmad all together in a three-way conversation. The nurse transfers the call to a private room where Dr. Ahmad is waiting, and my sister joins from her home phone. Inez goes through the safety plan point by point, making sure everyone understands and agrees to each part. She confirms that I won't have any unsupervised contact with my nephew for at least 90 days, meaning another adult has to be present anytime I'm in the same room with him. She confirms that I'll maintain weekly therapy appointments and monthly psychiatry appointments throughout the monitoring period. She confirms that my sister will immediately contact CPS if she has any concerns at all about my stability or behavior. She confirms that I'll continue taking my medication as prescribed and following my treatment plan. Everyone takes turns saying they understand and agree to their parts of the plan, and I make sure to say clearly that I'm committed to following every requirement because I know how important it is for my nephew's safety and my family's peace of mind. Inez thanks everyone for their cooperation and says she'll be scheduling a home visit in 30 days to check on progress, and that if everything continues going well, she'll recommend case closure at the 90-day mark. After we all hang up, I feel like a huge milestone has been reached, because having everyone on the same page with clear expectations means we can move forward instead of being stuck in uncertainty about what happens next. On day 10, Dr. Ahmad signs my discharge papers and hands me 3 prescriptions, along with a thick packet of information about warning signs to watch for. I fold everything into my backpack next to the notebook, and the few clothes my sister brought me, and the occupational therapist walks me through the discharge process one more time to make sure I understand all my follow-up appointments. My first outpatient therapy session is scheduled for 2 days from now, and my psychiatry follow-up with Dr. Ahmad is in 3 days, and I have a card with the mobile crisis number to call if I start having symptoms I can't manage. Walking out through the hospital lobby feels strange after 10 days of being watched constantly, and I keep expecting someone to stop me and say there's been a mistake. The bus ride home takes 40 minutes, and I spend most of it staring at my shoes to avoid seeing colors around other passengers, though I catch faint glimmers a few times that I force myself to ignore. When I unlock my apartment door and step inside, everything looks exactly the same as when I left in the crisis team's van. But somehow it all feels different now that I know what was happening in my brain. I drop my backpack on the couch and stand in the middle of my living room for a minute, trying to figure out where to start. And then I notice how the overhead light seems way too bright and creates this visual static that makes my eyes hurt. I flip the switch off and the room gets darker but calmer, and I decide right then that I need to change all the bulbs to something softer that won't trigger the visual distortions. I spend the next hour going through every room, unscrewing the bright white bulbs, and replacing them with warm yellow ones I find in the closet. And when I'm done, the whole apartment has this gentler glow that doesn't make my brain feel like it's buzzing. The bathroom mirror is the hardest part, because I remember standing there and seeing my own black aura with those tentacles reaching out, and even though I know it wasn't real, I still feel anxious looking at my reflection. I take the mirror down from the wall and lean it facing backward in the closet, telling myself I can put it back up later when I'm more stable. There's a smaller mirror in my bedroom too, and I cover it with a towel, and once both mirrors are dealt with, I feel this sense of relief like I've removed something dangerous from my space. I make myself a simple dinner of pasta and vegetables, taking my evening medication with water and setting an alarm on my phone so I'll remember to take the morning dose at the same time tomorrow. That first night I sleep in short stretches, waking up every few hours to check that I'm really home and really okay, but by morning I've gotten maybe 5 hours total, which feels like progress. 3 days later, I'm sitting in Dr. Ahmad's outpatient office for my first appointment since discharge, and he asks me to walk him through every day since I left the hospital. I tell him about changing the light bulbs and covering the mirrors, and he nods like this makes perfect sense and writes something in his notes. When he asks if I've had any symptoms, I'm honest about the brief moment on the bus, when I saw faint colors around other passengers, and about one night when I heard a distant whisper while I was falling asleep. He asks specific questions about how long each symptom lasted and what I did to manage it, and when I describe using the grounding techniques and the symptoms fading within minutes, he smiles and says, this is exactly what he wants to see. The medication is working, but it takes 4 to 6 weeks to reach full effectiveness, so some leftover symptoms are completely normal and should keep decreasing over time. He orders blood work to check the medication levels in my system and make sure the dose is right, and the nurse comes in to draw 3 vials that she labels and sends to the lab. Before I leave, Dr. Ahmad reminds me that taking my medication at the same time every single day is critical for keeping stable blood levels, and I show him the alarms I've set on my phone for 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. He schedules my next appointment for 2 weeks out instead of 1 week, saying he's confident enough in my progress that we can space things out a bit, and hearing that makes me feel like I'm actually getting better instead of just barely holding on. I spend most of that afternoon trying to figure out how to reach out to my coworker without making things weird. And finally, I just send her an email explaining that I've been dealing with a mental health situation and I won't be giving people advice or insights anymore. She responds within an hour saying she didn't know I'd been giving people advice and asks if I'm okay. I write back clarifying that I'd been making assumptions about people based on things that weren't real, and I need to set better boundaries going forward about not commenting on other people's lives or feelings. Her next email is supportive and kind, telling me to take whatever time I need to focus on getting better and that everyone at work misses me. I feel this wave of relief reading her words because I'd been so worried that people would think I was crazy or dangerous, but she just sounds concerned and caring like a normal friend would be. I save her email in a folder so I can read it again if I start spiraling into shame about what happened. My mother calls that evening while I'm making dinner, and I can hear the smile in her voice before she even tells me her news. The cardiologist found a manageable heart rhythm problem called an arrhythmia that can be controlled with a low-dose medication, and she needs to cut back on caffeine and come in for regular checkups, but there's no sign of serious heart disease. She'll be fine with these simple changes, and the doctor said lots of people have this same condition and live completely normal lives. I feel this huge weight lift off my chest, hearing that her health issue is real and treatable, not some mysterious infection I spread to her through my hallucinations. When I tell her how relieved I am, she gets quiet for a second, and then says she knows I was worried about her, and she's glad we can both stop worrying now. We talk for another 20 minutes about normal things like what she's cooking for dinner, and whether she should get a new couch, and having a conversation that's just regular family stuff instead of crisis management feels like another piece of my life clicking back into place. A month after my discharge, Inez shows up at my sister's house for the scheduled home visit to review how everything is going. My sister texts me afterward to tell me what happened, explaining that Inez checked all the safety measures they'd set up and asked detailed questions about how I've been following the rules. My sister told her I've been attending all my appointments, taking my medication consistently, and respecting every single boundary around contact with my nephew, without any pushback or complaints. Inez wrote everything down in her report and told my sister she's planning to recommend closing the case at the 90-day mark, as long as everything continues going this well. My sister sounds cautiously happy in her text, like she's starting to believe we might actually get through this without permanent damage to our family. I text back thanking her for being honest with Inez and for giving me another chance to prove I'm serious about staying stable, and she responds with a heart emoji, which feels like more than I deserve, but also exactly what I need to see. The next afternoon, my phone rings with a call from work, and when I answer, it's Pilar from HR, asking if I have time to talk about my return to work plan. We spend 30 minutes going through options, and she suggests starting with part-time remote work for the first month so I can ease back in without the stress of commuting and being in the office full-time. I can work from home 3 days a week and come in for 2 days, gradually increasing my hours until I'm back to full-time, and then we can reassess whether I want to keep some remote days or transition completely back to the office. When she asks if I need any accommodations, I mention that fluorescent lighting has been triggering my symptoms, and she immediately says she can arrange for me to have a desk near a window with a desk lamp so I don't have to use the overhead lights. Her tone is completely matter-of-fact and professional, like she's solving a simple logistics problem instead of making special arrangements for someone with a mental illness, and her approach makes me feel way less ashamed about needing help. I thank her multiple times before we hang up, and she tells me the company values me as an employee and wants to support my health however they can. 3 weeks after discharge, I'm scrolling through my phone, and I see a photo my sister sent in our family group chat, showing my nephew in his high chair with mashed sweet potato all over his face. I smile at first because he looks ridiculous, but then I notice this faint golden shimmer around his head in the image, and my brain immediately tries to interpret it as meaningful. For just a second, I feel that pull toward believing the shimmer means something important, but then I catch myself and remember what Dr. Ahmad taught me about reality testing. I say out loud to myself, even though I'm alone in my apartment, that this is just a symptom, just a visual distortion from my brain trying to create patterns that aren't really there. I focus on my breathing the way Jonas showed me, counting 4 in and 4 out, and within maybe 30 seconds the golden shimmer fades, and I'm just looking at a normal photo of a messy baby. I feel genuinely proud of myself for recognizing the symptom and managing it in real time, instead of letting it spiral into delusional thinking about what the gold color might mean. I text my sister back saying he's adorable, and ask how she's doing, keeping the conversation completely normal and not mentioning anything about colors or auras or the brief moment when my brain tried to trick me. My sister calls me a few days later and asks if I want to come over for a supervised visit, mentioning that our mother will be there too, so there will be 2 adults present the whole time. I feel nervous driving to her house, but also excited because I haven't been in the same room as my nephew since the crisis in his nursery. When I arrive, my sister opens the door with the baby on her hip, and I stay in the doorway until she gestures me inside. We all sit in the living room with me in a chair across from the couch, where my sister holds my nephew, and my mother sits between us like a buffer. I don't ask to hold him or try to get closer, respecting the boundaries that are in place even though part of me wants to prove I'm safe now. We talk for an hour about regular stuff like my return to work plan and my mother's new medication, and I can hear my nephew babbling and see him playing with a toy, but I keep my distance. Being in the same room with him and not having any symptoms or scary thoughts feels like a huge step forward, like proof that the medication and therapy are actually working. When I get up to leave, my sister walks me to the door and then pulls me into a hug, saying she can see how hard I'm working on my recovery, and she's proud of me. I feel tears start, but I blink them back and just hug her tight for a second before letting go and heading to my car. I notice while getting dressed one morning that my jeans are tighter than they used to be, and when I step on the scale, I've gained about 10 pounds since starting the antipsychotic medication. Dr. Ahmad warned me this was a possible side effect, but seeing the number still bothers me because I've never had to think about my weight before. I spend a few minutes feeling frustrated and considering whether I could just stop taking the medication, but then I remember the voices commanding me to hurt my nephew, and I know the weight gain is worth it. Instead of stopping my medication, I go through my kitchen and get rid of the chips and cookies and frozen pizzas, replacing them with vegetables and fruit and lean protein. I start taking walks around my neighborhood every evening after dinner, just 20 or 30 minutes of moving my body and getting outside. The weight gain still bothers me when I think about it, but I'm learning to accept that managing my illness means accepting some side effects that are inconvenient, but not dangerous. I'd rather be 10 pounds heavier and stable than thin, and hearing voices telling me to hurt people, and every time I take my medication, I remind myself that this trade-off is worth it for keeping my brain working right. A few weeks later, I find a flyer at my therapist's office advertising a peer support group for people with psychotic disorders that meets every Thursday evening at a community center across town. I spend 3 days talking myself into going, and 3 more days talking myself out of it before I finally drive to the address on Thursday night and park outside the building. The meeting room has a circle of folding chairs and 8 people already sitting when I walk in, and I take a seat near the door in case I need to leave quickly. The facilitator welcomes me and explains that sharing is voluntary but encouraged, and then people start going around the circle talking about their week and their symptoms and their medication side effects. When it's my turn, I feel my face get hot and my hands start shaking. But I force myself to talk about the crisis in my nephew's nursery and how I almost acted on the command hallucinations before I pulled back and asked for help instead. A woman across the circle nods and says she's been there too, hearing voices telling her to hurt her sister, and she's proud of me for recognizing it as a symptom and getting help. A man in his 50s says my story reminded him of his own turning point 15 years ago when he called 911 on himself, and that choosing help over the voices was the hardest and most important decision he ever made. After the meeting ends, several people come up to thank me for sharing, and I realize that being honest about my experience might actually help other people feel less alone in their struggles. I drive home feeling lighter than I have in months, like maybe having this illness doesn't mean I'm broken or dangerous, just sick in a way that requires ongoing management and support from people who understand. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 90 days after the crisis, my phone rings, and it's my sister calling with a shaky voice that makes my stomach drop until she says she's crying happy tears. Inez sent her a letter officially closing the CPS case, stating that all requirements have been met and no further monitoring is needed. The letter notes my consistent treatment compliance, the safety measures we have in place, and the positive reports from my treatment providers. My sister reads parts of it to me over the phone, and I can hear the relief in her voice when she says this feels like a major milestone in rebuilding trust and moving forward as a family. I thank her for being patient with me and for giving me the chance to prove I'm taking my recovery seriously. And when we hang up, I sit on my couch for a long time, just feeling grateful that I didn't permanently destroy my relationship with the people I love most. That same week, Pilar emails me asking to schedule a video call to finalize my return to work transition plan, and we spend an hour going through the details and accommodations. We agree that I'll start coming into the office 2 days a week next month and work from home the other 3 days, giving me a gradual re-entry that won't overwhelm me. She's arranged for me to have a workspace near a window with natural light, instead of under the fluorescent panels, and I'll have the flexibility to take breaks if I'm feeling symptoms or need to use my grounding techniques. I tell her I'm nervous about seeing my coworkers again and worried they'll treat me differently now that they know I had a mental health crisis. But I'm also ready to start rebuilding the normal parts of my life and proving to myself that I can function in the world again. Pilar assures me that my medical information is confidential and that she'll only share what I authorize her to share, which makes me feel more in control of the situation. The next afternoon, I sit at my kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and start writing a letter to my nephew that I plan to give him when he's old enough to understand what happened when he was a baby. I write about my illness and the voices I was hearing, explaining that I was very sick and my brain wasn't working right. I describe the moment in his nursery when I almost listened to the commands, but chose to ask for help instead, and I write about all the treatment and therapy I've done since then to get better. I tell him about the boundaries that were put in place to keep him safe, and why I had to stay at a distance for a while, emphasizing that none of this was his fault and that I love him even though I couldn't be close to him during that time. Writing the letter helps me process my own feelings of guilt and shame, forcing me to put the experience into words that a child could eventually understand. It feels important to document my perspective so he'll know someday that I recognized I was dangerous and chose to protect him instead of acting on what my broken brain was telling me to do. I fold the letter and put it in an envelope with his name on it, storing it in my desk drawer for the future. The following weekend, my family has dinner together at my sister's house with clear ground rules established beforehand about supervision and boundaries. I sit across the table from my nephew's high chair and watch him smear mashed sweet potato on his face, while my sister and mother and I talk about normal everyday things like the weather and our mother's garden and a movie my sister watched. I don't ask to hold him or try to get closer than the agreed-upon distance, respecting the boundaries that are in place, even though part of me wants to prove I'm completely safe now. After dinner, I help my sister clean up the kitchen, washing dishes while she puts away leftovers, and we talk about her plans to take the baby to a music class and my plans to start back at work. When I leave that evening, I feel a sense of calm satisfaction that we're finding a new normal together, even if it looks different from it did before. The relationships aren't the same as they were before the crisis, but they're healing in a realistic way that acknowledges what happened while moving forward. A few days later, my mother calls and asks if I want to go for a walk with her at the park near her house, and I drive over that afternoon to meet her. We walk the loop trail together, and she tells me she's feeling much better on her heart medication and has more energy than she's had in months. The cardiologist is happy with her progress and expects she'll be able to manage the arrhythmia long-term with the current treatment plan. I ask her how she's doing emotionally with everything that happened, and she admits she's been seeing a therapist herself to process the fear and stress of watching her son go through a mental health crisis. She says it helps to talk to someone about her worry and her guilt about not noticing I was sick sooner, and I tell her there's no way she could have known since I was hiding it and convincing myself it was a psychic ability. Our conversation feels closer and more honest than it has in years, like we're both acknowledging the reality of what happened instead of pretending everything is fine. I have a follow-up appointment with Dr. Ahmad where we sit in his office reviewing my progress over the past 3 months since I was discharged from the hospital. He asks detailed questions about my symptoms, and I'm honest that the voices have decreased significantly to occasional whispers I can easily identify and dismiss, and the visual distortions only happen now when I'm very tired or stressed. He examines my medication log and lab results, noting that my levels are good, but that the weight gain is becoming significant enough to address. He adjusts my prescription slightly, lowering the dose of the antipsychotic a bit and adding a medication that should help with the metabolic side effects while maintaining symptom control. We agree to move to monthly appointments instead of weekly since I'm doing so well and showing good insight into my condition, but he reminds me that I'll likely need to stay on medication long-term and continue therapy. He's pleased with my stability and commitment to treatment, and he emphasizes that recovery isn't about being cured, but about learning to manage symptoms and recognize warning signs before they escalate. The next day, Pilar sends me an email confirming that my part-time remote work arrangement will start next Monday, with all the details about my schedule and information about accessing the office on my in-person days. I'll be working from home Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and coming into the office Tuesday and Thursday to start rebuilding my presence with the team. She's attached instructions for the building access card and parking pass, and she reminds me that I can reach out anytime if I need additional support or adjustments to the accommodations. I feel a mix of excitement and nervousness about returning to work, but I'm confident that the gradual approach and the accommodations we've arranged will help me succeed. Having my job waiting for me feels like validation that I'm capable of moving forward with my life, despite my mental illness, and I'm determined to prove that I can manage both my health and my career responsibilities without letting either one suffer. On a quiet evening at home, I'm folding laundry from the dryer and sorting it into piles on my bed when I notice my nephew's tiny sock that must have gotten mixed in with my things after the last family dinner. I hold it in my hand, feeling a wave of tenderness for him, this little person I almost hurt when I was sick. For just a moment, I hear a distant whisper trying to assign meaning to the sock, something about blue thread meaning sadness, or the small size meaning vulnerability, but I immediately recognize it as a symptom trying to pull me back into delusional thinking. I set the sock aside on my dresser to return to my sister next time I see her, and I go to the kitchen to take my evening medication with a glass of water. I pull out my crisis plan from the drawer and review it like I do most nights, reminding myself of the warning signs to watch for and the coping skills to use and the people to call if I need help. I feel genuinely proud that I chose the concrete tools of recovery over the seductive pull of the voices, recognizing the whisper for what it was and refusing to give it power. I know I'll need to make that same choice every day for the rest of my life, choosing reality over the false certainty the voices offer, but I'm confident now that I can do it. All right, story's over. Turns out psychotic breaks don't resolve neatly in Act 3. Shocking. If you feel obligated to support this documentation of psychiatric crises, leave a like and subscribe. I'll keep finding these stories that make you grateful your brain chemistry is relatively stable. Thanks for enabling this.